All right, today we're talking about perception. Seeing is believing. What do you think about that, Mark?
Well, it turns out that believing is seeing for human beings. It kind of turns everything on its head. So, perception in human, this is a startling fact. I read in scientific literature that perception is preconditioned. So, seeing is not believing, believing is seeing.
Excited to dig in with you on this topic today on our channel, Mastering Thought. I'm here with Dr. Mark Waller. My name is Christina Black, and we talk about the mind, marriage, and mental health. So, welcome.
Glad to have everybody, and we're going to talk about perception today. And you're going to see in a few minutes that perception is what drives our emotions and our behavior. And so it's the key thing that's kind of the linchpin that holds this whole thing together. And we're going to really dive deep into it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, if you haven't already done it for us, go ahead and like and subscribe to our channel. We are offering you awesome content every week. And Mark has so much experience, 2.5 decades. There's so much wisdom he has to share with us. And we get feedback all the time that he has been and we have been on this channel helping. So if you are interested in getting a step deeper, go ahead and scan this QR code. It's going to take you to some options where you can get some one-on-one help or join a group. And we can kind of help you along the way.
And we'll bring that QR code up again a little later on.
Mm-hmm.
So let's dive into this. So the first thing I want to bring up is the importance of perception. And those of you who have been watching some of our other videos, you'll recognize this cognitive model. Perception triggers feelings, which drives defensive behavior. And over again in our previous videos, we've talked about the importance of perception and how it gets, I guess, overlooked would be a good way of thinking about it. Oops.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we just sort of take it as a given, but there's a lot you can do with perception, a lot you can influence.
So, so here's perception. This woman is obviously not smelling a rose, but she thinks she's smelling a rose.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what is perception, and where does it come from? Just out of curiosity, Christina, how would you define perception in your own mind?
I would say in layman's terms, like how something hits you.
Okay, I like
How,
that. That's a really
yeah,
succinct way.
how you perceive it. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's the way our own personal style of creating meaning out of our experience. That's our
Mm-hmm.
perception.
Mm-hmm. And
And
that's human
as
nature. We
well,
always want to assign meaning
that's
naturally.
that's right. It's part of survival.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I thought this was clever. Do you like my little graphic there?
The phrase that comes up into my head is, "Does a skunk by any other name smell as sweet?"
Very clever. Very clever.
Thank you. Christina Shakespeare? I don't know. Probably a stretch. More like,
So,
what else is she gonna say?
and guess where perception comes from?
Okay,
Um,
let me guess. Uh, is it the amygdala? Would it be?
the well, it's really a combination of the amygdala and the hippocampus, right down
Ah.
in there.
Mm-hmm.
The hippocampus is the part of the brain that kind of fishes around in our early emotional memories and pairs those memories with our current experience.
Okay. Right, it
So, but
assigns the meaning. I remember that.
that's right. So the point is
Mm-hmm.
this whole area here is pretty much involved, but the major players here are the amygdala and the hippocampus right down in here. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
now why is this critically important? It's critically important because this is basically the 5-year-old emotional brain.
Yeah, these are instincts.
Right. So
Um,
so our perception, is coming from the child brain.
hmm
This is not good news.
hmm
And unfortunately, it gets even worse.
hmm
So I want to introduce a term that brain scientists use, and this is called afference. And what afference specific, I don't want to get in the weeds here and try to, be self-important, but you may run across this term. And what it means is the process of signals coming from the input, like our five senses, up into the
hmm
brain. It basically
Okay.
it's the traveling of those signals.
Okay.
So here's an abstract representation of the concept of afference.
hmm
Uh, and this is where sensory information traveling toward the central nervous system.
Okay.
All right, so that's all well and good, right?
hmm
But here's the problem: perception is pre-afferent. In other words, perception is preconditioned in the brain.
hmm
So we are preconditioned by our early childhood programming to expect a perception to be whatever it is we believe it's supposed to be. So believing is seeing.
hmm
And
hmm
this is really bad news because, sometimes that might be not true.
Right, but you're convinced that it is.
Right. So if let's say
Yeah.
if you're preconditioned to expect rejection, if I say to you, Christine, it's a wonderful day, and you might say, well, there you go again.
Yeah. Yeah, for
So in
sure.
other words, we're preconditioned. So our here's some perceptions that the limbic system has. Being attacked, being in trouble, rejected, pressured, controlled, compared. And comparison, I
hmm
believe, is what triggers jealousy, by the way. So maybe someday we'll
hmm
talk about that.
Interesting. That would
Now,
be a great episode.
so the point being is these concepts here are what a 5-year-old would see. These are
hmm
not adult concepts. So our perceptions
Okay.
are not adult perceptions, they're child perceptions.
Well, that makes so much sense because each of those things is something felt by someone who maybe feels helpless,
Okay, yeah.
and a child is sort of at the mercy of whoever's around them and taking care of them or not.
That's that's
So,
absolutely correct. And when I
yeah.
work with people, I'll often say, "Well, what's your perception of that, or how do you feel about that, or some open-ended question."
hmm
And if they start giving me an adult answer, I'll stop them and say, "Talk to me like a 5-year-old. How would a 5-year-old answer that question?" And
hmm
you would be surprised how fast that gets to the truth, because when you start philosophizing, in your adult brain, rationalizing things, you don't get to simple concepts like I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
So somebody once
Yeah.
said,
Yeah, yeah.
a psychologist I read an article once said that we human beings are not rational beings with emotions. We're emotional beings that rationalize.
hmm hmm
Okay, so now
Interesting.
we're going to kind of go off the cliff here a little bit. Please, everybody, stay with me because this is going to make a lot of sense. Just give me a few slides to work through this because I think this is absolutely fascinating. Why
Awesome.
is the believing seeing? Why is our perception preconditioned? So this takes us to a weatherman named Lorenz. I know this
I
sounds
remember
strange.
this graphic.
So there was a
Strange
weatherman. He was a
attractor.
researcher by the name of Lorenz, and Lorenz was trying to solve the problem of why can't we forecast the weather very well after up to about 30 to 60 days, and the reason is
Hmm.
because the data is just so chaotic and nonlinear and weird, and so you can't. It's very difficult to predict the weather for very long. And he thought, well, maybe the weather is like fluids, and so he started looking at the equations for fluid dynamics. And in a moment of inspiration, he thought, what if I plot this data in the phase relationship instead of trying to make it linear? Anyway,
Yeah.
so he plotted the data, the weather data, and he came up with this thing right here. And this was the birth of chaos theory or
Huh.
nonlinear dynamics. And this butterfly pattern here was the first ever strange attractor discovered in the underlying math of random data.
Hmm.
And
So
it launched a whole new field of mathematics. Go ahead.
are you meaning that he looked at weather patterns that had already happened and then charted that out with this theory in mind?
Right,
And then
right.
he used that to predict, the future a little better?
Well, I don't know what he did once he discovered this, but
Hmm.
but
But here we have it.
what's happening here. Let me go to a bigger picture of this. So here's a bigger picture of the butterfly pattern.
Yeah.
This is called the Lorenz attractor. Now
Hmm.
let me explain this, and this might answer your question and prompt more questions. So you
Hmm.
notice how the data, I don't know if it starts here or not, but let's just pretend it starts here. So you notice
Okay.
how the data goes here and it goes here and it goes
Yeah, and it
around here
coils.
and around,
Yep.
and eventually it comes out
And
here.
such starts doing eights. Yeah.
Okay, now what is the characteristic of this? Well, the characteristic is that you notice how the data never repeats.
Right.
Now, this is similar to the circumstances in our lives. The
Right.
circumstances we experience in our lives are never exactly the same.
Hmm. Right.
However, Lorenz found that it always ended up in this very stable pattern called an attractor pattern.
Hmm.
So within the attractor pattern, the data never repeats, but it's confined to this very recognizable pattern.
Hmm.
Okay, this is how our brains work, believe it or not.
Sure.
Okay,
Can believe it.
so let's talk about human beings, because the limbic system in particular is made up of attractor patterns. Just like the Lorenz attractor. They don't look exactly like that. Matter of fact, we probably don't know exactly how they look. But you can use the Lorenz mathematics to get attractor patterns. I saw once one online that was the attractor pattern created by the random walking of people in the Denver airport. It's really weird.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, so
Social
enough.
studies, man.
Yeah, I know. Okay, so now let's talk about the human experience of this.
Okay.
So you remember this slide we used a time or two ago.
Sure do.
This is the cornhole game, right? Where you throw the bean bags into the holes.
And each of these holes represent a trigger we might have, correct?
Exactly, very good. So this might be
Hmm.
rejection, this might be conflict avoidance, this might be, in this particular person, let's say this is feeling pressured and controlled. So
Hmm.
their biggest issue is right here, the bigger hole.
Hmm.
Okay, now let's throw this concept of an attractor pattern into this. So what we're going to do with the cornhole board here is we're going to give it some contour.
Like those old marble games on the trays that tilt.
Exactly. So if you
Yeah.
roll the marbles across the board, you can see, and I had a little trouble making, but hopefully you can see how there's a contour around these holes, and so
Yeah.
that
They're
has a
almost getting
tendency.
scooped in.
to sweep the marble into the hole, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah. Like even if they get close, it's like, and then sucked in.
Right. So this is
Mm-hmm.
how the brain works. Specifically, this is how the limbic system works.
And maybe identifies why it's so easy to get offended about certain topics,
That's
or why you're
exactly right.
so sensitive. Yeah. If it
Right.
smells like it's close, you just go there maybe.
That's right. So
Mm-hmm.
and back to our those of you who are familiar with our lion and unicorn model of relationships, these attractor patterns or these contours are going to be different for lions and different for unicorns.
Right.
And
And
so
different
if
probably based on the parents or childhood you had.
that's right. And so
Yeah.
now let me just that's a very interesting point that you just brought up because what would happen is these attractor patterns or these holes are going to be different for a lion or a unicorn. And then
Mm-hmm.
whatever happened to that child in their early childhood is going to determine how big these patterns are, how big the holes are.
And maybe how many.
Uh, it would certainly determine that for sure. But maybe you and I are both lions, for instance, but maybe your issue around rejection is bigger than mine, and so your
Sure.
attractor pattern would be larger.
Mm-hmm.
So
Got
you
it.
because of your childhood, uh, it may have created more conditioning to make you take things personally when they're not personal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is this
Yeah,
making
that makes
sense the way
sense.
I'm representing this?
I'm tracking, but if anybody feels unclear, please write in the comments because we'd love to clear it up for you.
So, in other words, what I'm trying to say is the wiring of the brain, not this physical wiring, but the way the networks operate. They operate as strange attractors and sweep our experience into those attractor patterns on a predetermined basis.
Mm-hmm.
And so it
Slightly
doesn't matter
magnetic.
exactly. So it
Yeah.
doesn't matter what's actually out here. If it becomes close enough for a match, it gets swept in to that attractor pattern, and then we feel, we have a perception that we're being rejected, or we're in trouble, or there's going to be conflict, or whatever,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
even though that's not true.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Now, here's
Yeah.
another way I represented this, and I think this is maybe might be easier for some people to understand. So here is a catcher, and his mitt here, his catcher's mitt, is an attractor pattern,
The vortex.
a vortex. And so you
What are
can
your
see if
vortexes?
so if the ball hits over out here, there's a tendency for it to get swept in to the
Mm-hmm.
vortex.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
way this and this is all about how the brain is wired up to help us survive.
Yeah.
So if we believe, a relationship means we're going to be rejected, then we have this big attractor pattern in the limbic system that sweeps our experience into this vortex, and guess what? It becomes rejection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or if you're a unicorn, maybe it becomes conflict that needs to
Yeah.
be avoided.
Mm-hmm. Kind of reminds me too, just for another example, of like white water rafting. And like if you fall in the water, there's certain parts of the river you want to be far away from because if you get a little too close, like you're a goner
So the
if you
metaphor
fall
of a
in. Yeah.
current in the river is
Yeah.
very similar to the metaphor of an attractor pattern.
Lorenzo's. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Lorenz attractor pattern. Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the point. The human condition, the die is cast. By the time we're 5 or 6 years of age, all this wiring is in there, and our perception has been hijacked by our early childhood experience, and we keep experiencing that hijacking over and over and over as long as we live.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So trying to go in and fight our perception is not going to change anything. It's too powerful. It's too strong.
Swimming upstream.
So yeah, so to use your metaphor, instead of swimming upstream, we need to get out of the river.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and you know where this is leading, I'm sure.
It's not my first rodeo.
So the answer to the question of how do of course, this is the monkey brain over here. This is the limbic system, and here the person is observing their own limbic system. This is called self-awareness.
Mm.
So the
Mm-hmm.
way out of this is self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And
An
how do you
awakened mind.
the awakened mind, and how do you get to that point? By doing self-observation.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't change a pattern that you can't observe.
Mm-hmm.
But it turns out if you observe the pattern, the observation itself will change it.
Just by being aware of what your patterns are
That's
allows you
that's correct.
a little outside third person view of yourself.
Do you remember when we did the program on anger management, anger?
Hmm.
What
Yeah.
was the problem with the anger management techniques? Do you remember that?
They Yeah, it was like anger management started after you got triggered. Anger management started after your perception was that you need to be on high alert. And so now
Right.
you're fighting instincts and limbic system rather than avoiding the whole mess altogether.
Right. And so
Yeah.
another way of saying that is all of those anger management techniques we went over, and I'll link that video to the end of this video. All the anger
Hmm.
management techniques ignored perception.
Hmm.
They all waited until the person was triggered and experiencing anger.
I would even argue that they didn't ignore it. They just were kind of helpless to tell you what to do.
Which is
Like
probably even worse.
they just accepted that it's part of it and there's no way out, you know?
Well, they tended to use things like willpower and stuff like that,
And
but
boundaries. You didn't like that one.
yeah,
I
boundaries.
remember that one.
So you're listening to this. You'll have to go watch that video because it's
Yeah.
kind of funny.
This is this is an anger management 2.0. Okay, perception. Here we go.
So if somebody came to me and said, "I want to work on my anger. I need to be less angry. Teach me how to be less angry," I would say, "I don't want to do that. I want to teach you how to understand the process of how you get angry." And of course, the
Hmm.
process starts with the perception.
Hmm.
Same
Mm.
thing in a relationship. What's the
I got it.
process? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I got an analogy. Go ahead and finish your sentence.
Well, like in a relationship, what is the process of getting into conflict in a relationship? With anxiety, what is the process that happens in the brain that produces anxiety? If you can understand that and observe it, then you become its master.
Hmm.
Okay, what's your analogy?
Hmm. Okay. It might be half baked, so correct if it's wrong. But there was a period of time this late winter, early spring that we were like having to mop the floor so often because I have a huge shepherd dog that loves to go outside and get muddy and then run inside. And it was like, how many times can we mop the floor in a day? Until we realized, oh, let's stop her at the door and wipe off her paws for her. And just getting her out of even having muddy paws eliminated the need to mop 3 times a day.
I like that. I like that analogy. So the idea is if your perception is that you are being attacked, but you're not aware that you're having that perception, how can you deal with the downstream effects of feeling attacked if you don't know you're even having that perception?
Right.
So self-awareness is the key to, in other words, we're not looking at the behavior and trying to change the behavior or the feelings. We're looking from content to process. What is the process that creates the anger or the jealousy or the avoidance or whatever? And
Mm-hmm.
the process all starts with the perception, which is preconditioned.
Mm-hmm.
And once you see that, once the front of the brain, the adult brain, sees that the child brain is doing this, that breaks the spell right there. Just the awareness of it
Mm-hmm.
itself changes
Mm-hmm.
the pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And people find that hard to believe. But
Sure.
you've been through this process. The instant you had that awakening experience, you began to be able to see what you were doing.
Yeah.
And the seeing was the power.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So, and this leads us to the thought watching, which we've talked about in a number of other videos, which I will also link to this. Self awareness is about seeing how the limbic system hijacks perception.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have a slide on this, but it becomes about moving from perception to perspective. Perspective takes you outside of the limbic system, and in psychology we call that metacognition, which is literally thinking about thinking.
Okay, repeat the P's. You had a great alliteration. From perception to perspective.
Right,
Yeah. I
right.
feel like that's a good one to write down on the sticky note.
So let's put it this way: perception is a function of the monkey brain. Perspective is a function of the adult brain, the prefrontal cortex up here.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's what the thought watching exercise, which we've discussed in numerous other videos, is designed to help a person make that shift.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if I can see, let's say I'm taking something personally, and I can see I'm suddenly aware, oh, I'm taking it personally. And then I take another look at this person and I realize when I get perspective that that's not what's happening at all. It's a complete misinterpretation.
Mm-hmm. And it helps you give the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. So in summary, what we talked about today was the fact that perception is in the limbic system. It's a function of the limbic system. And the limbic system is wired up to sweep our experience into these predetermined patterns that usually we're not aware of at all. And so, what we believe we're going to see in our lives is a self fulfilling prophecy. I like that old saying, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, understanding perception is the key to getting out of the limbic system patterns that have us trapped in our lives.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes something that helps me recognize that I've let my perception or limbic system take over is if it's like too many people have made me feel the same like bad feeling, and then I realize like, well, they're all different people. They don't like the only thing in common with this is me. So like I don't think all these people
Yeah.
are trying to reject me. So maybe like I'm too ready to find how people are rejecting me instead of like stepping back and realizing that like I'm just making myself see it this way.
So what you're saying is very profound because the essence of what you just said is that the monkey brain is addicted to struggle.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've got an issue with rejection, you have to create rejection in your life in order to struggle against it. So when
Mm-hmm.
you really boil it down, it's about the struggle for rejection. It's not about actually getting accepted. It's about struggling with rejection. And getting
Yeah.
perspective releases you from the struggle.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I hope people watching this got some value from this, and it's a different way of looking at things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, if you like this kind of information, make sure you like and subscribe. And if you want to, interact with us directly, just scan this QR code. There's also a link in the description that takes you to the same place.
Mm-hmm. Get to fill out a little form and we can help you in the ways you're interested.
And not only that, but if you want to learn how to do the thought watching, what we can teach you. We can have some groups to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
also, if you want to appear on the podcast with us and work through something, we don't do therapy, but we will teach you these models that we use, and you can apply them in real time and see how they work for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so let me do a little self promotion here. Here are my books, The Dance of the Lion and Unicorn. And I'm trying to remember, I think The Lion and Unicorn is the one where we deal with these concepts around perception.
I think that's true.
So anyway, and that book is also available as an audiobook.
Mm-hmm.
So Christina, anything you want to say in summary or
Well, let's just recap. Okay, so we've gone over that perception is preset, and when something happens in your life or around you, your brain wants to categorize it in something it's familiar with, and that can sometimes with the monkey brain mean that you want to find the struggle that you have had. So you'll try to find anything that can match that and suck it into that hole.
I really
Correct?
like the way you said that. That's very good.
Okay. And there is an out. You are not totally helpless to this experience, and that takes awareness,
Right.
and that there are tools to use to become more aware. And not only can you just watch this channel to learn how to do that, you can also scan the QR code to get some more personalized and or shared group experience uh, exposure and communication with others. Am I saying that right? I feel like I'm in my head a little bit too much right now. So if you like the idea of someone having their eyes on you, like Mark and Christina, you can join a group and or scan the QR code. And then, and not to say there's no other ways, you can read books, and The Lion and the Unicorn would be a good way to do that. Am I
All right.
understanding this right?
I think that's a good summary.
Yay! Hey, I have a favor to ask. We did not talk about this before the episode, but I think it would be a good idea if you put that slide up that had the different ways we can be triggered. And I would be
Oh,
super interested to hear about what do the listeners want. Maybe leave a comment about what you would like the next episode to be on. Do you have problems with feeling like you're in trouble or you've been compared or whatever? Thanks for going
excellent.
with me, Mark.
No, that's
So
great.
please
I
let
like.
us know.
All
Yeah, we
right.
want to hear from you. This is not two people talking to avoid. We are here for you. So,
Very good. So until we meet again.
all right. It's been another great week. Thanks, Mark.
All right. We'll see you next time.
All right, everybody, take care.